In the midst of a pouring rain on a deserted road, Ethan Reed, an ordinary mechanic, stopped his car to help a strange woman who had an accident with her luxury SUV. He did not expect that this small act would change his fate forever. A few days later, a shiny black Range Rover appeared at the factory door, carrying an offer Ethan never expected. Standing on the threshold of an unfamiliar world, he was forced to choose between the safety of the familiar and the opportunity to change his life. But sometimes, just one brave step forward, life can completely turn in a different direction. Welcome to Kindness Stories, where every act of kindness has the power to change lives. Today, discover a surprising story of unconditional kindness and unexpected rewards. Rain fell heavily on the road through the dense woods of Brookhaven, Pennsylvania. Large drops of rain pattered on the tin roof of an old machine shop. Inside, a dim yellow light was emitted from old light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The clang of metal rang out, along with the hissing of welding machines. Ethan Reed, a mechanic in his mid-30s, was hunched over the chassis of an old pickup truck. His calloused hands were slick with oil, and his muscles were hard under his faded mechanic's coat. His face was focused, his brow furrowed, as if he wanted to force a stubborn bolt to yield to his wrench. "All right, Mr. Johnson, your car is ready to roll." Ethan stood up, wiping his hands with a towel and smiling at his regular customer. End of Chapter 8. "You're the best, Ethan," Mr. Johnson replied, placing a $20 bill in his hand as a tip. "No need, Mr. Johnson," Ethan refused, trying to push the bill back. "Here, you have to take care of your old lady, right?" Mr. Johnson winked. Ethan looked at him, sighed softly, and took the money. Such is Ethan's life. He is a kind man, but kindness does not pay the bills. His mother, Rose Reed, is in the hospital for expensive heart surgery. She is the only one left in the family, and Ethan does not want to lose her. After work, Ethan stripped off his mechanic's uniform and put on an old coat and a wool hat. Outside, the rain was still falling. He climbed into his old Ford pickup. The engine started after 2 tries, wheezing. "Here we go again," Ethan grumbled. The road home through the woods along Highway 17 was slippery with mud and pouring rain. The windshield wipers were running constantly, but still could not clear the blurry vision ahead. In the pouring rain, Ethan suddenly noticed a flashing light in the distance. It was the hazard lights of a car parked on the side of the road. The sleek SUV, a new Lexus GX it appeared to be, was lying on its right side. A woman stood nearby, waving weakly, her other hand clutching an umbrella that was being blown back by the wind. Ethan hesitated. Helping a stranger in the rain wasn't a good idea, especially when he was tired and hungry. But then he remembered his mother. If it were her, would I expect someone to stop? Without further ado, Ethan slowed down and pulled over. He put on his raincoat, put his hat back on, and got out of the car. "Are you okay?" Ethan walked toward the woman. She looked up, her eyes filled with worry but gratitude. She was in her early 30s. Her long brown hair was tied back, but now it was soaked. A few strands stuck to her face. Her long coat was also almost completely wet. The umbrella was not enough to protect her from the strong wind. "I got a flat tire." I don't know how to change a tire," she said, her voice shaking, perhaps from the cold. "I called for help, but they said it could take over an hour. I have an important meeting in town." "Where's the spare tire?" Ethan asked immediately, his voice firm but not lacking in composure. "Oh, in the trunk," she replied, her voice a little shy. "Okay, let me help." She stared at him as if she couldn't believe this kindness. "Thank you," said Bridget. "I'm Amelia Hayes," she said, her eyes grateful. The phrase summarized her feelings about the upcoming week. There were all kinds of things she could try, but she decided for the moment, at death was kinder. She said, "Come with me." "Amelia Hayes," she said, "you're welcome to join, I'm sure of the fire, but let's first concentrate on what got her here." "Ethan Reed, nice to meet you," he replied curtly and walked to the back of the car. "Who, me?" The rain was still pouring and the wind was so strong that Amelia's umbrella flipped over. She tried to right it, but it was no use, and finally she gave up, huddling in her coat. Ethan pulled out the spare tire, muddy but new. He checked his tools, then started to remove the tire. "You don't have to do that," Amelia said loudly over the rain. "I can wait for help." "No problem, I do this every day." Ethan leaned down, his voice low and steady. His hands moved quickly to turn the bolts, raise the car with the jack, and remove the damaged tire. Mud stuck to his knees and sleeves, but he didn't care. His calloused fingers gripped the heavy tire, and he quickly installed the new one. For a few minutes, everything seemed to be going smoothly, until a speeding truck passed, its tires splashing mud all over Ethan. Startled, he slipped and fell into a nearby ditch. "Oh my God!" Amelia screamed, running towards him. Ethan sat up, covered in mud and soaked through, but he just shook his head and smiled. "I guess I need a clean set of clothes." Ethan frowned. Ethan picked up his suit jacket and clothes rack from where they'd fallen and turned around. "Are you okay?" Amelia held out her hand. "I'm fine." Ethan stood, brushing the mud off his shirt, though it didn't help. "Let me finish." In a few minutes, the new tire was installed. Ethan tightened the bolts and did a final check. He stood up, breathing a sigh of relief. "Done. You may continue your journey." "I can't believe it. You're a hero," Amelia said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Just a mechanic," Ethan smiled. She stepped forward, pulled out her wallet, and was about to give him money. "You deserve this." "No need," Ethan waved his hand. "I do it because I want to, not for the money." She paused, looking deep into his eyes. A smile spread across Amelia's face, a knowing smile. "You are an interesting man, Ethan Reed." Court asked him. "Just a regular mechanic," he shrugged and walked toward his car. "We will meet again," she said, with certainty. Ethan turned, frowning, but before he could ask anything, she climbed into her car, closed the door, and revved the engine. The Lexus sped away in the rain. Ethan stood there watching, his eyes filled with thought. Little did he know that his life had just taken a new turn. 3 days had passed since Ethan had helped the wealthy Amelia Hayes. Life went on as usual. The small Brookhaven mechanic shop was busy with routine repairs. Ethan was still working under pickup trucks, oil clinging to his hands and clothes. That afternoon, as he finished changing the brakes on an old car, the phone rang from the corner of his desk. It was an old-fashioned landline, usually used only for calls from customers in town. "Brookhaven Machine Shop, I'm Ethan," he said, his voice tired but still polite. "Hello, this is Rachel from Hayes Ventures. I'm calling for Ethan Reed, right?" Ethan frowned slightly. "Yes, it's me. What's up?" "We'd like to talk to you about a special job opportunity," Rachel said, her voice polite but serious. "We received a direct offer from our CEO, Amelia Hayes, and she would like to offer you a new job opportunity." Ethan was silent for a few seconds, trying to remember if he knew anyone at Hayes Ventures, but then the name Amelia Hayes rang in his head like a loud bell. "Wait, you mean Mrs. Hayes? I met a few days ago." "Yes, she did," Rachel replied. "She asked us to contact you immediately. If you agree, we can arrange a short video conference to discuss the opportunity." Ethan frowned, feeling that something was off about this. "I'm not sure. I'm just a small-town mechanic. I think you're mistaken." Hyder coughed. "Black smoke." "No mistake, Mr. Reed," Rachel replied. Mrs. Hayes was impressed with your performance and wanted to give you a chance to show your abilities. Okay, Ethan sighed, still skeptical. I'll think about it and call back. I hope it doesn't take too long because this is a great opportunity, Rachel added, before hanging up. The discovery of science. Ethan stood there, half believing. It must be some kind of joke, he thought to himself, and continued his work. But the next day, everything changed. Around 9 p.m., a shiny black Range Rover pulled up in front of the workshop. All the workers in the workshop stopped and looked up with curious eyes. The car door opened, and out stepped Amelia Hayes, dressed elegantly in an expensive gray suit. Her high heels made a click, click, click sound on the wet cement floor. "Where is Ethan Reed?" Her strong voice rang out. Everyone turned their eyes to Ethan, who was standing by the truck with a wrench in his hand. Ethan turned around, his eyes wide, so surprised that he almost dropped the wrench. "Asher? Mrs. Hayes?" he stammered, stepping closer quickly. "Hello, Ethan. I tried to contact you, but you didn't seem very interested," Amelia smiled, her eyes sharp but still a little warm. "I'm sorry, but I don't think this is true." Ethan scratched his head, embarrassed. "This is real, Ethan," Amelia said sternly. "I didn't come here to talk. I came here to make an offer." All of Ethan's colleagues gathered around, their eyes wide. "We need to talk in private," she said firmly. Ethan sat across from Amelia Hayes in the small cafe near the factory. Outside, the rain was still falling lightly, not as hard as before. In front of him was a cup of hot coffee, but Ethan did not touch it. "You know why I'm here, right?" Amelia asked, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "Honestly, I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "I'm just a regular mechanic." "You are a mechanic who thinks logically, is patient, and acts with kindness without expecting reward," she replied, her eyes sharp but warm. "I want you to work for me." "Do? Do what?" Ethan was surprised. "Head of vehicle maintenance for Hayes Ventures," Amelia replied, serious. "We are looking for a reliable person to oversee our nationwide fleet of vehicle maintenance vehicles. With your experience and attitude, I think you are the right fit for the position." "You must be kidding," Ethan laughed. "I only fix pickup trucks in this small town," Theo said, grabbing his coat. "You're better than you think." Amelia leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "I've met hundreds of people, but you're different. I need someone like you." Ethan bit his lip and leaned back in his chair. A flood of thoughts rushed through him. A steady job, friends at the mechanic shop, his mother in the hospital. All of these things kept him in this small town, alone, and in a psychiatric hospital he hadn't seen before in his life. People's psychiatric, physical, and mental health problems. "But what about my mother?" he hesitated. "We have first-class health insurance for our employees," Amelia replied immediately, as if she had anticipated the question. "If you agree, your mother will receive the best care." That statement made Ethan pause. He bowed his head, thinking for a long moment. "That sounds too good to be true." Ethan frowned. "You could have picked anyone better than me." "Why me?" "Because you don't take money from me." Amelia chuckled. "I trust you to be unbridled. Now go and get some sleep." Silence fell. Ethan felt the weight of her words. He had always thought of himself as just a mechanic. But for the first time, someone saw something more in him. "How much?" Ethan broke the silence, looking Amelia straight in the eyes. $120,000 a year with full benefits, health insurance, and a yearly bonus, she replied immediately. "You can think about it, but this offer won't last forever." Ethan sighed, looking down at his coffee. It was more money than he ever thought he could make. He could pay his mother's hospital bills, maybe even buy a decent house. But it would mean leaving this town, leaving what was familiar. He wanted his dad to listen to him. "You don't have to answer right away," Amelia stood, adjusting her coat. "I'll give you 3 days to think about it." She stared, quietly contemplating. Ethan watched her as she walked out of the cafe, her gait confident. He knew the next 3 days would be the longest of his life. Understanding or planning? Ethan Reed's inner turmoil. That morning, he stood before the mirror in his small kitchen. The old opaque mirror reflected him in his thick coat and his face full of tension. Before him were 2 clear paths. Stayed in town, continued his steady job as a mechanic, but never had enough money to pay his mother's hospital bills. By the time he was president, Bale was in Congress for her 9 years. Amelia May's offer entering a completely strange world. "You must help yourself before you can help others," his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Ethan took a deep breath and dialed the number. The familiar voice of Rachel, Amelia's assistant, rang out on the other end of the line. Ethan asked why he called the number that Rachel had given him. She glanced at her watch. She cried. "Hello, I'm Ethan Reed," he said, his voice more firm than ever. "Tell Mrs. Hayes, I accept." "That's good to hear, Mr. Reed," Rachel replied with satisfaction. "I'll send you your flight information right away. We'll pick you up in New York tomorrow morning." Ethan hung up, staring at the phone for a long moment. A mixture of excitement and fear filled his chest. But this time, he didn't try to hide from it. The next day, Ethan stood at the gate of JFK Airport in New York, staring blankly at the hustle and bustle of the city. Everything around him was a far cry from the quiet of Brookhaven. Crowds of people rushed past him, giant billboards flashed across the sky, men pretending to be saddened flying past with his face screwed. A man in a black suit holding a sign with the name Ethan Reed stood near the exit. Ethan approached. "Emma." "Hi, I'm Ethan," he said. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Reed. I'm Daniel, Mrs. Hayes' driver. The car is waiting outside." The black Mercedes S-Class glided smoothly down the busy New York boulevard. Ethan sat still, eyes glued to the window, watching the skyscrapers rising into the gray sky. For the first time in his life, he felt his insignificance in the vast world. Hayes Ventures headquarters, a modern building with shiny blue glass. Ethan looked up, feeling like it was high up in the sky. "Welcome to Hayes Ventures, Mr. Reed," Rachel, whom he had spoken to on the phone, greeted him in the main lobby. "Mrs. Hayes is waiting for you on the 35th floor." Ethan stepped into the elevator, standing still as the metal doors closed. His heart pounded. When the elevator doors opened, a new world opened before him. A modern office with polished wood floors and wide glass doors that looked out over the city. Amelia stood near the window, a cup of coffee in her hand, turning when she saw Ethan. "I have a person to get you killed." "Right on time," she smiled, setting down her coffee cup. "Just luck," Ethan chuckled, trying to hide his nervousness. "There's no such thing as luck, Ethan," she said, stepping closer to him. "Those who strike at the right moment are often the best prepared. Are you ready for a new challenge?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm here, which means I'm ready." Amelia smiled, patting him on the shoulder. "Good. Today, we're taking you to meet the maintenance and management team. You don't have to know everything from the start, but I need you to be willing to learn. And remember, you had the right to say no, but you chose to stay." The words burned into Ethan's mind. He followed Amelia down the hallway, where every employee bowed to her with respect. His feelings changed. For the first time in his life, he no longer felt small. The first few weeks weren't easy. Ethan had to learn the company's complex fleet of vehicles, from delivery trucks to the luxury fleet that serves VIPs. But with each passing day, he felt more confident. One day, Amelia called him into the conference room. "Ethan, sit." She pointed to the chair in front of her. "What's the matter, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked. "We're deploying a new fleet out west, and I need someone to oversee the process." She paused, looking him straight in the eye. "I want you to go." "What does that mean?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "It means I trust you, and when I trust someone, I give them responsibility," she replied, her voice firm. Ethan sat up straight. It was the first time in his life someone had placed such great faith in him. "Then I won't disappoint you," he said firmly. "Excellent answer, Ethan," Amelia smiled. "I always knew I wasn't wrong. Scientists have always said that no two patients are exactly alike." 3 months later, Ethan returned to Brookhaven. His black Range Rover drove him back to his old mechanic shop, where his old co-workers had heard the news about the mechanic who became the big boss. "Who's back?" a colleague shouted. Ethan stepped out of the car, wearing a nice coat, but his shoes were still muddy from the fleet inspection. "You don't remember these lowly mechanics, do you?" a colleague joked. "Don't be silly, I haven't forgotten anyone." Ethan patted his old friend on the shoulder. "And I haven't forgotten this workshop either." Heel heavily as he returned to the trunk, he opened the trunk and took out a brand new set of car repair tools. "Here's a present for you guys." Ethan set it down on the cement floor, a smile on his face. Everyone was amazed, their eyes filled with admiration and gratitude. That day, Ethan went to the hospital to visit his mother. Mrs. Rose sat on the hospital bed, her face thin, but her eyes full of warmth. The couple separated when Ethan and Rachel entered the room. "Mom, you don't have to worry about the hospital bills anymore." He sat down, taking her hand. "I paid it all. Everything is fine." Rose's eyes filled with tears and she squeezed his hand. "You did it, Ethan. I knew you could." Ethan bowed his head and took a deep breath. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had surpassed himself. Ethan Reed's story is a testament to how a small act of kindness can change a destiny. Sometimes, kindness doesn't need to be reciprocated immediately, but when it is, it can open up opportunities we never dreamed of. Ethan not only changed his own life, but he also inspired others. Good people always get their reward, sooner or later. And that's the story of how a small act of kindness can change a life. Sometimes just stopping for a moment to help others can open the door to unexpected opportunities. If you believe that kindness can create miracles, please like, share, and follow Kindness Stories to spread more meaningful stories. Remember, this world can become a better place if you are willing to give a little love. Thank you for following. See you in the next stories.